The LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans, Louisiana has a fascinating and terrifying past. It's a must-see stop when visiting the Big Easy. Rumors and legends plague the history of this grand manor. However, the occupants of this house were far more terrifying than the house itself. The story of Madame Marie Delphine LaLaurie, also known as the murderous mistress of New Orleans, is the stuff nightmares are made of. Stroll down the macabre street and learn the truth. Bon ton roulette. Welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, and these are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts.
Hello.
We've got one for you guys tonight. The story of Madame Marie Delphine LaLaurie, the murderous mistress of New Orleans.
Crazy bitch,
Child,
bitch.
This bitch was a trip.
Oh my God.
Now, I know, now, Ryan, have you ever been to New Orleans?
I have not. I
You have
really
not.
want to go. It's one of those places that's on my list. I've been to Charleston. I've been to Savannah. New Orleans is like the next one on my list I really want to go to.
You have to. Oh my God, you have to.
I want to so bad.
New Orleans is one of those places that really, truly has to be experienced. The stories about it, it does not do it justice. The energy of the place, the music, the legends, and the ghosts that all inhabit New Orleans, and that makes it the fabric of this amazing city. That if you have not been to New Orleans, do yourself a favor, take a trip there. Ryan, that maybe have to be something we do this summer, because Blake, you've been, I've been, and y'all let's go to New Orleans.
I'm like, hold on. I'll start it off with one of my pictures. Me in front of the LaLaurie Mansion. Woo!
There you go. There you go. And I too have a picture in front of the LaLaurie Mansion. However, I was there on a trip to have fun, and I might have been wearing a crown and may not have looked my best. Might have been drinking a few hurricanes. Might have been drinking a few hurricanes.
Not in New Orleans. Not you.
Allegedly. So that picture did not make it in. Maybe a Patreon exclusive if I get brave enough. So what do you guys think? You ready to go to New Orleans with me and hear a story about Madame LaLaurie?
Yes, let's
Hell
do
yeah.
this.
So, Marie Delphine McCarty was born on March 19th of 1787 to a prominent family in the white Creole community of New Orleans in Spanish-ruled Louisiana. Now, when she was born, Spain owned Louisiana. It was not part of the United States yet.
Right.
So her mother, and I'm going to tell you this, you're going to hear a lot of the name Marie and Louis because they seem to like to name each other the same name. So her mother was Marie Janine Lovable, Lovable, and she was of French descent, and she was also known as the widow Lecomte. I can't speak this evening, and her marriage to Delphine's father was actually her second marriage. Now, why that's important, I do not know, but it was referenced everywhere I found it. So apparently, second wife, whatever. And her father was actually an Irish immigrant, and he was Louis Bartholomew de McCarty. and he was a decorated military officer and even had been knighted by the Royal and Military Order of St. Louis.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was very well known. He was very wealthy. And all of the McCarty men had military backgrounds, and they were all landowners. And here we go, folks. We're going to be talking about history, and we are going to have some disturbing content in this. They were also slave owners. And we are not going to sanitize that part of this history because this is very important to her story.
Absolutely.
So the entire family was very wealthy, very influential, suddenly I can't speak, and connected. They were connected in every way you can be connected in New Orleans. Delphine's cousin, Augustine de McCarty, was the mayor of New Orleans from 1815 to 1820. And so she has all these military men in her family. They lived next to a count. And she grew up on 100, excuse me. Again, words are hard. We're going to reset. Delphine grew up on a 1,344 acre plantation.
Whew.
Huge.
Damn.
Huge.
Gum.
And again, her famous neighbor was the very wealthy Count Pierre Philip Mandeville de Marigny. I hope I got that right. I practiced saying that like 5 times.
Now, to give a visual of how big 1,300 acres are,
1,344.
1 acre is roughly about the size of a football field. Give you an idea. There you go.
And she had a
very large estate.
a whole bunch. She grew up on a whole bunch of land. So rich and privileged Delphine was raised in a household of excess, I guess you could say. Her mother Marie was known to throw lavish parties, and sometimes those parties got to be a bit scandalous. So these parties were something Delphine grew up with. The parties that her mother threw often would run into the wee hours of the morning. Sometimes the guests, because it's so hot in New Orleans, they would jump into the canal on the property to cool off.
Oh.
Delphine's mother delighted in stealing the clothes and the shoes of the male guests, forcing them to walk home barefoot and in their undergarments.
Now she's funny. I like her.
God, she is me. She is me.
So, Marie McCarty's practical jokes were well known by all of her guests, and you wanted to go to one of her parties because shit was going to get wild. And Delphine, when she was a child, was described as being very, very beautiful, a very beautiful little girl. And so there was no shortage of suitors that were standing in line to marry this daughter of this wealthy landowner who was a decorated military man. And on June 11th, at the age of 14, she married her first husband. Now, the year that they give is June 11th, 1800, which technically would have made her 13.
13, depending on when her birthday fell, yeah.
Her birthday fell in March.
Yep.
Yeah.
But still, she was born in 87. 87 to 1800, she was barely 13. So
Ugh.
the number versus the year doesn't quite add up. They say she was barely 14. I think she was barely 13. And she married Ramon Lopez de Angulo de Calendaria. I almost got that right all the way across. He was a 35-year-old widower and officer of the Spanish crown. He was also second in command to the Louisiana governor. So this 35-year-old says, yeah, 13, that works. Now, Ramon, go ahead.
So what's he going to talk to her about? Pokemon? Like, Jesus Christ.
Oh, I mean, we know historical context. Historical context. The younger you were, you basically got married younger.
Unfortunately.
I get it, but
Still creepy.
Still creepy.
Creepy as all hell.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So at 13, although they say 14, she was married to Ramon, who, again, by all accounts, was a decent and respected man. He was considered a very good man. But he had a little bit of bitterness towards the Spanish crown because his first wife had actually died on his voyage to New Orleans, even though he had begged the Spanish ruler to please just delay his voyage by a month so that he could sail in more favorable conditions and make the journey less taxing on his wife at the time, who was not accustomed to being on the seas. And unfortunately, she perished on the journey. So he was very bitter about this. And because his wishes were ignored, He blamed the crown for his wife's death, and then he kind of began to rebel after he got over here. So he opened up the importation of captives directly from Africa. Now, the Spanish crown had said, don't do this, because they were kind of prohibiting it due to these types of transactions in the area at the time. It wasn't going so well, and they wanted the hostilities to settle down just a little bit. He didn't care. He's like, nope, we're importing. That's what I'm here to do. We're doing it. And then he was also reprimanded for marrying without permission. As a Spanish officer, high ranking, you got to get permission from the crown to get married.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's said that he actually did write for permission to marry Delphine. However, he didn't think there was any way they would tell him no. So he went ahead and married her. Well, in fact, when he finally got the letter, it takes months and months and months to get the message across the seas, let the ruler contemplate it, get it back to you. Turns out they said no. Well, what the hell is he going to do? He's already married to her. So...
living under the rule of ask forgiveness, not permission, I guess.
That's right. That's right. And I'm a big believer in that. So as punishment, the Spanish ruler began to shuffle him around the globe, sending him to Havana, Cuba, they're sending him everywhere, but not keeping him at home with his young wife. So Delphine, heartbroken that her husband is being taken away from her, she begins a letter writing campaign to the Queen of Spain. And she begged the Queen to pardon Ramon. And in 1804, Delphine traveled to Spain intent on speaking with the Queen.
Wow.
And amazingly enough, she was granted an audience with Queen Consort Maria Luisa of Parma. The Queen was so impressed with Delphine's passion and her eloquence and her beauty that she granted Delphine's request and issued a full pardon for Ramon. So word was passed to Ramon, and he boarded a ship in Bordeaux to travel home to Delphine, who was pregnant with their first child. So it's not known that if when she sailed over, she was pregnant, or if when she got there, she realized she was pregnant. But she was pregnant. Unfortunately, poor Ramon, he never met his child. On January 11th in 1805, his ship hit a sandbar off the coast of Havana, and Ramon was killed. Now, during this time, Delphine gave birth to their child, a daughter named, are you ready for this? Maria Borgia Delphine Lopez de Aguilera de Calendaria.
Good Lord.
I almost got all the way through it.
Wow.
Good Lord.
That's a name right there.
I'd call her alphabet because she had every
Lopez name. Aguilera de Calendaria.
Wow, that's a name right there. Wow.
They called her Borgita for short. Which
I would hope so.
Yeah, that poor kid, she ain't never gonna be able to write that on her first grade paper.
I was gonna say, can you imagine being in trouble and your parents call down the hallway
call that your full name?
Like, Marie, blah, 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 get here now. Like, oh my God.
I'd be able to run and hide by then. I'd forget what they wanted at that point. I'd be like, wait, who were you calling for? So Delphine went to Havana, and she stayed there long enough to bury her husband, Ramon, and to get her daughter baptized. Then she returned home to New Orleans. So the young widow, and whenever she got there, this young widow and new mother, she realized that New Orleans was no longer under Spanish rule or even French rule. It was now under American ownership. So the time this happened, Louisiana Purchase happened. And so she comes back and, well, why the hell she even bother with Spain? Because Spain didn't even charge Louisiana.
Damn.
She gets back and they're like, guess what? You didn't have to make the trip after all.
You didn't have to do that.
Parts closed. Moose out front, I told
you. So she lives with her mother until 1807 with her baby until her mother dies. And she leaves in her will to Delphine $33,007. This is very specific. $33,007. A downtown plantation on the banks of the Mississippi, 52 slaves, livestock, and farm equipment. Now, Delphine had a brother named Louis and a sister named Marie Therese. And apparently this the mother's inheritance, what she left in the will, was divided up equally among the three children. So if Delphine got $33,007 and a plantation and 52 slaves and livestock and farm equipment. And it's divided evenly.
Wow.
You can only imagine the value that the mother had.
Oh, yeah.
That's an estate right there, especially back in 1800s. Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of capital.
That is a lot. And that's basically, I believe, what the I think I had it written down here somewhere. It didn't make the second cut of rewriting my notes. It was worth about $7 billion in today's money.
Wow.
And that was now Delphine's mother and father actually lived at separate locations. They had a lot of real estate. And the mother liked to party and the father not so much. So they kind of had their own households that they went in. So here she is with all this money. And then enter Jean-Paul LeBlanc. He already sounds scandalous, doesn't he?
A little bit.
He was an older Frenchman and a widower who arrived in New Orleans with an agenda. He was a ruthless businessman. He was an active player in the slave trade, active player in politics. He was a lawyer and a legislator. And he was also known to be an associate of the pirate brothers, John and Pierre Lafitte.
Ooh.
Ah.
So maybe whenever he arrived in New Orleans, he saw an opportunity to get rich quick and potentially control Delphine's inheritance. So he courted her, he wooed her, and it didn't take long because on Delphine's 20th birthday, March 19th of 1807, she married husband number 2, Jean-Paul LeBlanc. I like to say that name, Jean-Paul LeBlanc. Oui, oui. So the father was overjoyed that Delphine was getting a second chance in life, that she wouldn't have to be alone. And as a wedding gift, her father, Louis McCarthy, gave Delphine another plantation.
Good Lord.
And this one was on St. Charles Street. And he gave her another 26 slaves.
Wow.
Wow.
That was valued around $1.4 million at that point. So now Delphine is a very, very rich woman. And so after her marriage to John Paul, Mr. LeBlanc went on a bit of a spending spree. And that included another 2-story townhome at 409 Royal Street. And he bought that for the family, though.
Oh, of course. I mean, for the family.
Of course he did. Yeah.
And that property became known as Villa Blanc. It was very fancy. It was kind of the place she wanted to be. Now, during this time that they were married, they had 4 more children. There's the thunder. Do y'all hear my thunder? They had 4 children during their 3-year marriage, 3 daughters and a son. And these children's names were Marie Louise Pauline, Louise Marie LaLaurie, Marie Louise Janine, and Jean-Pierre Paulin.
Well, damn, I thought the first name you said was name all 3 of the kids.
Like I said, they like to use the same names over and over and over again.
Poor Jean-Paul. He's like, he's the outcast.
Well, the only thing is if you call that Marie, all the girls were definitely going to answer. So, and then Jean-Pierre Paulin was the boy. And so the family lived an exceptionally privileged life. I mean, Blanc was a director at the Bank of Louisiana, and they had a strong footing in the New Orleans society and upper class. So January 8th, 1815, the Battle of New Orleans is fought 5 miles southeast of the French Quarter between the British, led by Major General Sir Edward Parkingham, and the U.S. Army was led by none other than Major General Andrew Jackson.
Old Andrew Jackson coming back for his second week.
Yeah. Here he is. He's making an appearance. That's the only reason I mentioned that is because we're talking about Andrew Jackson.
Old Hickory.
That's right. And less than a year after the battle, Jean-Paul Blanc was dead. He was dead at 50.
Wow.
Damn.
And Delphine now was 28 years old with 5 children now, because she had 1 from her first marriage and 4 with Mr. LeBlanc, and was now tasked with the job of settling her husband's estate. Well, she was shocked to find out that his estate consisted of over $160,000 of debt.
Oh no!
Which would be $2.5 million in today's money. So Mr. LeBlanc had been having a lot of fun with Miss Marie's money.
Mm-hmm.
But Madame Delphine was not a dumb woman. She was a very smart woman, and she figured out how to keep her cash. In 1816, she renounced her claim to all of their community property and forfeited all of their mutual assets. And that allowed her to keep her property and her assets because those were hers before she came into the marriage. Mm-hmm. She gave up anything they'd acquired together. However, she didn't give up what was just in his name. She gave up what was mutual. So she technically kept a little bit of his stuff and kept all of her stuff and got rid of anything they bought together. Well, she didn't have to get rid of Villa Blanca because technically her husband had bought it, not both of them. So Villa Blanca was still there. So over the next 10 years, Delphine auctioned off much of Blanc's property and the slaves, and she was using that to pay off the debt, and she put a little extra money in her pocket here and there. And according to records during this time, 8 of Delphine's slaves died in a span of 5 years. Now, the reason we know this, and this is according to records, because you paid taxes on things you owned, and slaves were considered property. If one died, you had to report it, thus lessening your tax liability, as awful and horrible as that sounds.
Yeah.
So in 5 years, 8 of her slaves died. They were all female. This was very strange. What I found very strange, they were all female. And most were children. The rest were females of childbearing age. And their causes of death were all listed as unknown. So, is this our foreshadowing of how horrible she was? Or was this just... Now, again, you have to remember, at this time, cholera was going around. There were all kinds of diseases. You were in the swampy, New Orleans, Louisiana area. And there were a lot of diseases going around. Right. So were they natural causes based on disease? Was it something she did? We do not know.
So I think that because she was so connected in town and in Louisiana, period, it seems like if it was cholera or something like that, somebody would have had some sort of record of that happening. So,
why? They were considered.
I
weren't considered people.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
That's long and short of it.
Yeah, that's really shitty. But I understand that. But I think that even then, though, like somebody would have some sort of record of that. So maybe she could have used her connections to be like, oh, well, we don't know what happened. Even though we have to register that this happened, but we don't know exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think personally.
And I have a tendency to lean towards that theory as well. Mm-hmm. So this debt that Mr. LeBlanc had incurred seriously damaged Delphine's wealth. And, she was, a little hard up for cash. She wasn't broke by any stretch of the imagination, but she was not comfortable with her finance level. But a morbid stroke of luck saved her. Her father died in 1824.
Hot damn.
Well, that's probably what she was saying.
I was going to say, for somebody in her situation, she probably was like, hell yes. But
so let me tell you a little bit about her father. After the death of Delphine's mother, Delphine's father explored a more unconventional relationship. He had a long-term relationship with a free woman of color that was biracial, and her name was Sophie Musante. The couple had a child that they named Delphine and Missy McCarty. Sophie wanted to name the child after Delphine. And they also named Delphine and her brother Louis the godparents of little Delphine and Missy. So, right. So the father, obviously, and in all honesty, this was not something that was that unheard of in the New Orleans society, especially since they were part of the white Creole community. There were people of color that were born free. And if they had a certain percentage of white heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be born of color and still be free. Little Delphine Amici was born free. So a lot of the McCarty men, I got to say this right, McCarty. I keep wanting to say the McCarty men, her uncle, her cousin actually carried on a relationship with a woman of color that was a free woman of color for almost 40 years. So this was not something that was that uncommon.
Right.
So anyway, that's just a little side note. Because that's actually going to play Little Amici. She's going to play in just here in a little while. Getting back to Delphine's father's death, he left his children, all three of them, a sizable inheritance. Delphine, Marie-Therese, and Louis were all cared for, very well cared for, in his will. And then there was another name listed in the will, Little Delphine Amici. Little Amici was between the ages of 12 and 15 years old at the time of his death. And little Amici was given $5,000 and 2 slaves. So she wasn't exactly given an equal cut.
Right.
But she was not left out. So this would have been unusual, but not unheard of. And perhaps that angered Delphine just a little. That the child of her father's not wife, mistress, was included in the will. We don't know. It's never mentioned. But I think that plays into her treatment later on. So Delphine's current circumstances sit at this. She's 38 years old now. She has 5 children, 2 dead husbands, and a shit ton of money. And this is where we run into husband number 3. This is Dr. Jean-Louis Léonard LaLaurie. Hey, I did that one right. Are you impressed?
that was really good, Shelley.
Thank you. And she meets him. He comes to New Orleans in late 1824 or early 1825. The exact date he gets there is a little bit hazy. I've seen it several different ways. One way they explained it, the timeline doesn't make sense because he couldn't have met her and married her in this amount of time. So we're thinking end of 1824. And Dr. LaLaurie arrived in New Orleans from France, and he wanted to open a practice to what he called to destroy hunches. This asshole wasn't no doctor. He's a damn chiropractor.
Hey. Now, wait a minute. Chiropractors are doctors.
Not them.
Hold on. You're gonna have a whole subsection of viewers pissed off at us. Hold on now.
Chiropractors. I'm not saying you don't have to have training, but you ain't cutting people open. Okay. So
but they have to be a doctor in order to they have to know what they're doing.
But he called himself a doctor. Okay.
Well, I mean,
even though he had no doctoral training,
he would definitely not be a doctor in today's standards. Let's put it that way.
No, he would not.
He just called himself a doctor.
He
was a chiropractor, quote unquote.
Yes, he was a chiropractor. Yes. Okay. In fact, he didn't actually begin to get any doctor training until he got to New Orleans. Okay. But he went ahead and opened him up a practice and calling himself Dr. Jean-Louis Léonard LaLaurie. And he was going to destroy hunches and straighten backs.
Didn't need a medical degree back then. So, hey,
That's
whatever.
right. That's right. Well, apparently one of Delphine's children needed some straightening out. So she took her child to see Dr. LaLaurie. And the romance was born. How scandalous it was, too. Dr. LaLaurie was 15 to 18 years younger than Delphine.
Oh, snap. She a cougar.
She about to say she's getting a cougar range now.
Yes.
Wait, so she's 38, right?
She's 38.
Damn, how old is he?
Damn.
He's like 22?
Okay, so I found one thing that said that she was 20 years older than him, which would have made him 18. So I find it very hard to believe that he was 18 and a doctor. Okay. Now, another reference I saw said that he was 15 years her junior, which would have made him 23, which he could have had some medical training at that point. Yeah. Another one said that he was 18 years her junior, which would have made him 20. So I said between 15 and 18 because that makes the most sense to me. Now, you know what? Just let your imagination run wild. She had her a younger man. Okay. And while it was very common for males to marry younger women, it was quite scandalous for a man to take an older wife. Oh my goodness. Because most men, they were interested in having children and carrying on the family name. And you get this old biddy over here. And I mean, shit, her eggs probably don't work right no more.
I say
old biddy.
Okay, listen, you guys, don't come at me because I'm older than Madame LaLaurie was, okay? And okay? So just don't come at me.
I'm cracking up at our comment section right now, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Why?
People are like, I like them young. Rawr. Like,
yeah, right. Okay. There you go.
Sorry.
So here's an even more scandalous
nasty, every one of y'all.
So here's an even more scandalous tidbit. Delphine allegedly became pregnant with Dr. LaLaurie's child out of wedlock. That hussy. And they kept the pregnancy a secret until 5 months after the birth of their son, Jean-Louis. His name was Jean-Louis.
Of course it was.
Mm-hmm.
At 5 months of age for their son, they headed to the notary to negotiate their marriage contract. Delphine was worth over $66,389.58. Okay, $66,388.58. That's what's on the marriage contract. That is her exact monetary worth.
Wow.
And this was in cash and land. That was her value, which is basically $1.5 million in today's money. Okay. And once the finance and the property matters were sorted out, they headed to the St. Louis Cathedral to make the marriage official in the eyes of the Catholic Church.
Beautiful place, by the way.
Suspiciously enough, the marriage date is listed as June 25th of 1825. Now, he didn't get there until the end of 24 or early 1825, and their son is 5 months old when they go. So it's alleged that the date on the marriage license was rolled back by about 6 months because, having a child out of wedlock would have definitely been frowned upon.
I was about to say, because the math ain't mathin'.
The math
right
didn't
here.
work. That's right.
It was a whirlwind romance. What are you talking about?
That's right. But she paid to have the marriage license date rolled back. So the date of their marriage, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So add about 5 months to that actual date, and you're probably closer to the actual date of her marriage. So in 1827, 40-year-old Delphine is on her third husband, 25-year-old Dr. LaLaurie, and that's what they say, that he's 25. If she's 40, he's 25, so we're guessing he's 15 years younger than she is. So 25-year-old Dr. LaLaurie is her new husband. He's a new father. He's in a new country, and he has his own chiropractic practice, and he is living with a very wealthy wife. He got it all going on.
Hey.
But instead of this being a match made in heaven, this seemed to be a match made from somewhere a little south of New Orleans. So the marriage was not a happy one. Archived letters written by friends mentioned the volatility of this couple. They would fight ferociously, then they would separate, only to return again to each other because they were in love, only to repeat the pattern again.
They want that makeup sex. That's what's going on. That's exactly what's happening.
That's exactly what it is.
And this is about the time letters written to friends begin to make the first mention of Delphine's cruelty to her slaves. This is the first time in archived letters that this is mentioned, that perhaps she doesn't really treat them as well as she should. Now, Dr. LaLaurie, he didn't mingle in his wife's affairs. He kind of let her do whatever the hell she wanted to do, and she let him do whatever the hell he wanted to do. And he didn't intrude on her day-to-day activities. Happy wife, happy life. He was trying to leave her the hell alone. And he let her do her things in her own way without any interference. Can you see how that might end up being a problem? In 1831, Delphine decided to purchase the lots on Royal and Hospital Street for herself. She did it on her own, and her husband had very little involvement in the process, probably because it was still in that, male-dominated thing where you had to have your husband sign it, but he was like, yeah, what do you want me to sign? Okay, go ahead. And in 1832, she started to build. and Delphine built a beautiful 3-level mansion with an attached slave quarters. So many affluent women of that time, they had slaves, and she, of course, had slaves for herself, just like any affluent woman living in that time frame would. And accounts of Delphine's treatments of her slaves between 1831 and 1834 are very mixed. In public, she appeared to be very polite and very kind and concerned for the well-being of her slaves. And she actually gained a reputation for being very soft and very kind-hearted to those that were in her care, for lack of a better word.
Well, what better way to cover her tracks and to keep up appearances?
And court records show that she freed 2 of her slaves during this time period. Jean-Louis, of course, Jean-Louis was one.
Of course it is.
Yeah, and in 1819. And a slave that was named Devence in 1832. She freed them. Now, there is also a story I found where she'd actually ended up at a later point in life freeing her children's nanny that they had. When her children were older, she freed her. And there's also another mention of another slave that was freed that was her personal shoemaker. And that person was freed to show the other slaves what could happen if you behaved well.
I think we actually don't we have a picture of the LaLaurie family, I think. Isn't this them?
Yes, now that is the Delphine is one of the little girls. And I do not know which one. She was not labeled. I'm guessing
Gotcha.
She is Marie Therese is the older child, so I'm guessing Madame LaLaurie is the youngest daughter. Because remember, it was pretty much all guys in Dad's family, all the cousins that were males and everything, and Marie Therese and Marie Delphine were the only girls. So, at least in that immediate part of the family. So people thought that Madame LaLaurie must be kind, because in order to free slaves, I mean, that was very expensive to do, because that was a purchased item, purchased goods, for lack of a better term for it. However, the rumors were beginning to circulate that perhaps she wasn't caring for the slaves properly. Many dismissed these rumors as just jealousy and someone taking advantage of a woman who had marital troubles. So just depending on who you talk to, they're like, they're just jealous. Oh, well, why don't they leave her alone? Madame Delphine is so nice. Da, 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 da. Her marriage was still very tormented. And finally, on November 16th of 1832, Delphine petitioned the courts for a separation from the bed and the board of her husband.
Fancy
She claimed
divorce.
Yeah.
Okay.
She wanted to be separated from him physically and financially. Yeah.
Dang.
She did not want to be under his care anymore, being that she was female. And of course, the males, tend to be in charge of things. She claimed that, and I'm going to call him Dr. LaLaurie because I get tired of saying Louis. She claimed that Dr. LaLaurie had treated her in such a manner as to render their living together insupportable. Delphine also claimed that Dr. LaLaurie had beaten her in front of witnesses. And 5 months into the petition for the legal separation, Dr. LaLaurie gave up, and he consented to move permanently into his newly acquired address in Plaquemines Parish. So he bought him another house. He's like, fine, go ahead. It's not a divorce. It's a separation. Because divorces are messy, and she didn't want to settle any more estates.
Now, is that pretty far from New Orleans, where Plaquemines Parish is?
It's Plaquemines Parish. It doesn't appear to be that far from it. I don't have that up on a map. It's basically, I believe, still in the New Orleans area.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a parish of New Orleans. So even though the LaLauries had separated, they were still well thought of in the community, and they were still seen out and about together, and still threw lavish parties at the LaLaurie mansion on 1140 Royal Street. And these parties were attended by everybody that was somebody, all the upper echelon of the New Orleans societies. And even though Madame Delphine was a well-respected socialite, the rumors and the whispers of her treatments of her slaves still persisted, still whispered and talked about, but not in polite company. It was something you said behind closed doors. Neighbors claimed that Delphine's slaves appeared to be singularly haggard and wretched. And the rumors about mistreatment became so widespread that a local lawyer was sent around to the LaLaurie mansion. And the lawyer was sent there to remind Delphine that there were laws relevant to the upkeep of slaves. And after a quick inspection, the lawyer found no evidence of wrongdoing. And so he left. Now, this court document that they're talking about is called the Code Noir. I think this is freaking awful.
No, it's horrible.
This is literally what it looked like. And it was rules and regulations and punishments of if you didn't treat your slave right, what could legally happen to you. And it was like, if you beat your slave in public, you could be fined. If you injured your slave, you could be fined. Could be,
exactly.
If you injured another person's slave, then you could be fined, and you would have to pay a fine not only to the courts but to the person whose slave was injured. If they couldn't work, you would have to pay whatever their total income that they might have earned for that person in a day to the slave owner. If you mangled a slave to the point where they couldn't work, then you were responsible for that slave's care until the slave passed away. If you mangled someone else's slave to the point where they couldn't work, you were responsible for the care of that slave, and you had to pay the slave owner the value and equivalent of what that slave would have been worth and what that slave would have produced for the remainder of that slave. And if you couldn't do it, you could sit in jail for a year and pay a $10 fine.
Just a year? Just a year.
Could.
Again, maybe. You could.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly.
It depended on
how often did it actually happen.
Yes, exactly. How often did it this thing? But as horrible as it is, there were laws. As horrible as they are, there were still laws of protection.
In the loosest sense of the word.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes. But it did outline that there could be a punishment. So the lawyer went around and told her, hey, listen, here's the code. If you're doing something you shouldn't be, knock it off because your neighbors are whispering. Go ahead, Ryan.
Just say if he's inspecting the house. I mean, who's gonna? I'm sure he's probably asking the slaves, "Hey, is she mistreating you?" Who's gonna say anything?
I bet he's not.
I bet
Madame
he's not.
She probably had, one of her servants bring them tea and cakes, and they discussed and said, "Oh, what you've heard has got to be untrue." Of course, because she was known to be exceptionally charming and eloquent.
But even if he had asked them anything, who's going to say anything?
And do you think that he asked them in front, alone? No, he asked them in front of, if he did, in front of Madame Delphine LaLaurie.
No one's going to say anything.
I guarantee exactly the situation that took place was it was just this guy showing up. Hey, just doing you a favor. People are talking. Knock it the fuck off.
Yeah, that's probably what the entire thing consisted of.
I mean, let's just be honest here. That's exactly what it came down to.
And so there are court records of letters written stating Delphine had been brought before a criminal court and charged with barbarous treatment of her slaves, and that she had violated the code of conduct laws. And she was found not guilty and absolved of the charges due to a lack of accusers willing to testify against her.
Exactly.
Well, damn. I mean, if you have evidence of barbarous acts, do you really think anyone's going to testify, especially the people that live with her who were victims of said barbarous acts? Come on. It's a kangaroo court. There's no way.
Exactly. Yeah. So her image was forever. Now, those were rumors, and she brought up she found not guilty. However, her image was forever tarnished when two of her slaves killed themselves. Okay. One we know is, I'll just tell you what happened. So the first story is of a young man who had, as he is told in the story, he made a mistake. We don't know what this mistake is, but he was so frightened of being punished or being tortured that he flung himself off the roof of the mansion. We don't have a name. That is one of the stories. Now, the second and probably the most famous story, which you've probably heard, is the story of Leah. And Leah was a young girl between 8 and 12 years old. Some stories say 8, some stories say 12, some say 10. She's between 8 and 12 years old. And she was Delphine's personal valet. She brushed her hair and helped get her dressed. And Leah was brushing Delphine's hair and caught a tangle and pulled her hair too hard, which sent Delphine into a rage. Terrified of the punishment, little girl ran, only to be pursued by Delphine. Wielding a bullwhip, the girl ran from room to room, floor to floor, trying to escape as Delphine is behind her, cracking this whip, slinging this whip at her. Wow. She escaped out the window of the building and onto the roof. But Delphine followed her. She gave chase, cracking the whip wildly, and trapped at the edge of the building, Leah, rather than be hit, hurled herself off the roof to her death. Neighbors allegedly saw Delphine burying the little girl on her property and called the police. So, it's alleged Delphine was cited and fined. And as a punishment, she was made to sell 9 of her slaves. But some of her affluent family members, thinking that there had been a terrible miscarriage of justice, bought the slaves back and gifted them back to Delphine.
Oh, God, so there's no escape.
Oh, God, yeah.
Jesus.
So now the question becomes, is the story of Leah true? Please don't ever make me defend Delphine LaLaurie. However, we're about telling the truth and getting to the bottom of stories.
We are.
There were written accounts of Delphine's cruelty and leathers. That is not debatable. But nowhere in any of these letters does the story of Leah appear. Slaves also, because they had to be registered. There was never a slave girl named Leah registered as being owned by Delphine LaLaurie.
But wasn't there several slaves that she owned that were not registered that they found out about?
Well, of course, once you have births and things like that, they have a certain, usually they wait until the slave was able to work before they registered them, because they would have to pay a tax on them. So if they weren't old enough to work, why would they register them in case they died of a disease or something like that? There were found to be some that weren't. However, I'm going to tell you that this is a legend. It's an embellishment of a story that does not need to be embellished. She was horrible. The stories of Delphine are horrible enough without embellishment. Most likely, the story of Leah is a legend.
Well, and the way that I see it is that a lot of your legends have to come from some form of the truth. It is
probably based in fact.
So I maybe possibly it wasn't the fact of like she chased her out on the roof and Leah jumped or fell or tripped or whatever the cause may have been to her death. But instead maybe it was a horrible mistreatment of a young enslaved girl.
I have no doubt that Madame Delphine more than likely chased a child with a bullwhip. That is not out of the scope of my realm of belief, knowing what I know about her. So the city of New Orleans was about to learn the ugly truth that was hidden inside this beautiful house at 1140 Royal Street. On April 10th in 1834, the LaLauries, together, were throwing a lavish party. And during the party, a fire broke out in the kitchen. Yet, they weren't real worried about it. The party kind of continued. And, I mean, it's like, it's just a little fire. So the party continued.
There's a fire in the kitchen, Jen.
Yeah.
Drink up, buddy.
Yeah. Now, a lot of
I'll beat that fire's ass.
In the story, this party is said to have gone on in the evening. However, according to the New Orleans Bee, the party actually broke out at 10 o'clock. The fire actually broke out around 10 o'clock in the morning. So you see how even in the pictures it's depicted at night. But the New Orleans Bee reported that the fire broke out at 10 a.m. Now, it's New Orleans. Do I think there could have been a party going on at 10 a.m. in New Orleans? Hell yeah. And the LaLauries were known to have these parties that went all day long into the wee hours of the morning, into the, starting early and ending late. So I believe that there was a party going on when the fire broke out because apparently it did not stop. And
That is true New Orleans fashion. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, bon temps
Whatever.
roulette. Let's go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So,
Have
so
another
the
shot.
fire kind of began to spread, and it was finally decided that maybe they should get out of the house. So some well-meaning partygoers wanted to help check the house and help remove belongings and slaves, because the slave quarters were above the kitchen area, which is where the fire broke out. And I believe, Blake, you have a picture of that. I know you're laughing at something on the comments. Show the picture. What is
the roof? The roof is
on
on
fire.
Oh, Jesus
I'm sorry.
Okay, so we're going to make that joke because we're about to get into the nitty gritty crappy shit about this. So show where the slave quarters were.
Okay.
And so anyway, they're wanting to help her evacuate her slaves, because the quarters were above where the fire had broken out, and now the fire is spreading and is getting bigger, and the party goers are getting nervous.
Okay,
but Delphine refused. Okay, it's in the trailer. They saw it in the trailer.
Well, here, I'll just throw this up there and I can tell I'm on the far left. On the far left corner, is basically above the top row of windows is where this attic space was. So that space in between the top row of the windows and the top of the roof, that's where the attic space was.
Yes, very small.
Yeah, it is very small.
So Delphine said, no, don't worry about it. She refused and told the partygoers there's nobody left inside. Everybody's already out. Well, everybody was out that she considered human. Everybody's out. So the people were helping the LaLauries move out their valuables and their art and their furniture. They were moving it out of the houses and putting it on carriages and into the street, just so that, just in case the fire spread out of control, they didn't lose all this beautiful artwork and furniture and all the beautiful things in their house. And Judge Jacques Francois Canon was one of the first neighbors to arrive on the scene. Concerned citizens whispered to the judge that they believed that there were still slaves inside the house. So the judge politely asked Dr. LaLaurie for permission to have the slaves removed and taken to safety. Dr. LaLaurie refused and quipped back, let me quote this because this dude's a real fucking dick. He put, there are those who would be better employed if they would attend to their own affairs instead of officiously meddling with the concerns of other people. So he basically told him to fuck off and mind his own business.
And there are human beings probably screaming in the top of this building to be let out. And God, what a just cold individual.
So you see, it might not have been all just Delphine's doing, because Dr. LaLaurie, he didn't seem too concerned either.
No. You don't think there wasn't a man back in that time that didn't know what was happening in a household that he was a part of?
Even though he lived somewhere else, he and Madame LaLaurie were around town together. They sometimes, because they couldn't stay away from each other. It was a love-hate relationship. So the fire kept growing and it kept spreading, and the fire department finally arrived, and they were desperate. They began to desperately fight these flames, which were now getting completely out of control. The judge finally, he was pissed. He ordered the citizens that were there and the partygoers to break down that door of that attic and see if there was anyone still inside. And this was against the protest of Dr. and Mrs. LaLaurie. They were saying, no. He goes, the hell with it. Break the door down. And what the rescuers found was more disgusting and more terrible and more horrifying than they could have ever imagined. They found a 60-year-old woman, identified as Delphine's cook, who was chained to the stove. She had started the fire because she just wanted to kill herself. She knew that she'd already made a mistake. Again, here's with the mistake again. She'd made a mistake, and she knew that the mistake would be discovered, and she feared death less than she feared the torture she would receive from the LaLauries. When rescuers got into the attic, they were met with an even more gruesome scene. A foul-smelling, smoke-filled, hazy room. And in this haze, they saw 7 humans, weighed down with heavy chains, covered in scars, emaciated, barely clinging to life.
Wow.
And all of them had been horribly mutilated in some way or another. Some had been suspended by the neck with their limbs stretched from end to end until some of their extremities were actually torn on their bodies.
God.
Jesus.
It was reported in the New Orleans paper that the slaves had been confined for several months, only given enough sustenance to survive and extend their suffering. Another slave's condition was so horrible that he could barely be looked upon by the rescuers. He had a hole that was cut into his head, and he was covered in scars, and he was infested with worms and maggots in his injuries. The other atrocities that were reported, there was a slave that had had his eyes gouged out. Another slave had their eyes crudely sewn shut.
I have never heard that.
Wow.
One female had broken bones, intentionally reset improperly, causing her to only be able to crawl on the floor like a crab.
Jesus
and now
Christ.
this last one, I cannot find any kind of documentation of, but it is listed in the lore and legend. One female had so many broken bones that after the bones were broken, she had been configured and kind of molded to fit in this small box, that her bones and limbs had been twisted to the point where they had grown together and that she only could fit in a small box.
Jesus Christ.
And of course, the most disgusting account, which again, I cannot find any documentation that this is truthful or not. And this is the one even more disturbing warning content that I already gave you one at the beginning, but here's the one that, to me, it's all awful. There was a slave that had allegedly had their mouth sewn shut, and this mouth sewn shut was filled with fecal matter and feces.
Mm. How could you, in good conscience, treat any other human being like this in any way, shape, or form? I mean,
it's awful.
It's awful. And I mean, they are sick individuals to do this to these people.
Blake's not even commenting. I'm with you. This is one that you kind of like go, what?
I mean, it's sadistic, vile, the stuff of nightmares. I mean, you can't even really put into words something that is this grotesque.
I can just tell you what was reported. I certainly do not want them to image in my head.
No, I know. It's one of those things that only the most of evil, sadistic individual does things like this. Yeah, are capable of it without having any remorse. Yeah, without having any remorse. I don't give a shit about the historical context at the time. We're talking about human fucking beings.
Yep.
Point blank.
Now, so the rescuers, seeing the condition of these poor people, they hurried to carry these injured slaves out of this foul-smelling room, and they put them on stretchers, and they took them down to the local jail for evaluation and protection. And don't ask me why they did this. They allowed people to come and view the slaves.
Of course,
God Almighty, yeah.
Why wouldn't they? Yeah.
And because people couldn't believe that this was done, so they were like, "No, this really happened. You come down, you can see for yourself. Be horrified at their condition. Come and see them." Apparently, over 4,000 people went through this jail in 48 hours to see.
Good God.
The human suffering that these people endured.
Just imagine being tortured and exploited your entire life, and then being rescued and being exploited once more for the amusement of other people.
In your worst hour of need.
Yeah.
Yeah. The condition of these slaves enraged the partygoers and the citizens that were on the street. And they began to call for the immediate arrest of Dr. Louis LaLaurie and Madame Delphine LaLaurie. They began to scream for them to be arrested. And the streets outside the mansion began to fill with this angry mob. And Mrs. LaLaurie, Miss Delphine, had loyal servants. And one of them was her coachman. And her coachman came to her and said, we have to get you out of here. And we have to go now. The coachman brought the carriage around. Madame Delphine stepped out into the crowd and crawled into the carriage. The crowd is stunned. She's just walked out the door and she steps into the carriage. And as she climbed in, the coachman whipped the horses to get them to move. The crowd realizes what's happening. She's trying to escape. They begin to grab the horses and pull at the reins, and they try to turn over the carriage. But the coachman, he keeps pushing those horses through and pushing them through. And he takes her to safety. The coachman drove her to the docks where she boarded a schooner and escaped New Orleans. Now, whenever the coachman returned to the LaLaurie house, now why he did this, I do not know. But he returned to the LaLaurie manor. And when he returned, this mob was in a frenzy. They turned over the carriage and destroyed it. They brutalized the horses and the coachman. Some accounts is that he was killed. Some was that he was just brutalized. We do not know. And then the mob descended on the house. And they destroyed every stick of furniture in it. Everything that they had tried to save, now that they stomped on it. They left only the walls standing. And they made sure that there was quite a bit of graffiti on it, denouncing Madame Delphine and Louis LaLaurie. So Delphine and Louis LaLaurie were never arrested because they escaped.
She wouldn't have been that lucky if I was there. All I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'd have been like throwing her in a contraption, been like, here, bitch, why don't you fucking see what it's like?
I gotta tell you right now, I don't know if she was smart or so entitled or so stupid that the coachman allegedly brought that carriage around to the front of the house and she stepped out into the crowd. Perhaps the crowd was stunned because she stepped out to face them. And then she jumps into the carriage and away she's whisked.
Privileged and entitled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly the 2 words.
So they escaped, but where did they go? Let me tell you. Delphine went across the river. When she boarded the ship, she went across the river to the town of Mandeville. And Louis and their young son, who was Louis Pierre, joined her there. Now, where Mr. LaLaurie went and how he got out is unclear. The story of Delphine is told because she did it so publicly. But they went over to Mandeville, and I believe, Blake, I sent you a picture of where they went. So they basically kind of went across the river, and they went to Mandeville. And she and her family stayed in Mandeville for a few weeks there with her cousin. We know that she was there because on April 21st, she signed a power of attorney paperwork for her daughter's husband, Placid Forstall, and Louis signed a power of attorney to another of her daughter's husbands, Augustus de Lassius, in order to take care of their finances, pay their taxes, pay their bills, deal with the sale of their property, their slaves. This was court filed. They signed a power of attorney, so they made it at least to Mandeville. And the order of where they went next is a bit of a mystery. So rumors, were that they never left New Orleans, that they never left Louisiana. Another rumor was they fled to New York, where Delphine lived under the name the Widow Blanc. Another one was that they escaped to France. But based on the evidence, the truth is actually a mixture of these 3 theories. And what we do know and what is documented is that poet William Cullen Bryant boarded a ship on June 24th of 1834. And it was sailing from New York to Normandy, France. He writes in his journals that he was on the deck of the vessel called the Poland, and he was pretty seasick. And this very pretty older lady kind of catches his eye, and he strikes up a conversation with her. And, he asks, he says, hello, I'm William Cullen Bryant. And he goes, who are you? And she says, oh, I'm Madame LaLaurie. And Mr. Bryant had heard the story of Madame LaLaurie. At this point, the story had spread everywhere.
I was going to say, because we're a month later at this point.
That's right. This story had spread. This story had made it to France and to Spain this story was now a worldwide story. This was terrible, terrible. And of course, merchants who traded in New Orleans, they took the stories back. Now, it was kind of like the telephone game. Every time they told it, it was embellished just a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
So William Cullen Bryant knew of the story of the LaLaurie atrocities. But he thought, this can't be her. This lady is so nice and sweet and eloquent and polite. And then he thought, but it has to be. She told him that she had traveled from Louisiana to New York and was now returning with her husband, Louis, to his native land of France.
Hmm.
And William Cullen Bryant documented this in his notes. The ship docked in France on July the 14th of 1834, and Delphine and Louis sought refuge at Louis' childhood home, where his father still lived in the small town of Villeneuve. Villeneuve. I'm trying to put my Spanish in with my French, and I'm not good at either. Villeneuve. That the story of the LaLauries had spread from the United States to France, like I said before, and Louis' father didn't exactly welcome them, and he didn't really want them in his home. But as always, something happens for the LaLauries. Another morbid turn of luck. Louis LaLaurie's mother, she had died previously, and her estate, because all of the children were not together, could not be settled. So he met up with his siblings, being that he was back in France. He met up with all of them and divided it up, except for his brother Laurent, who had kind of disappeared, and they declared him dead so they could get this thing settled. And Louis inherited his brother Laurent's house. And so since he'd never returned, he just kind of got it. There was it was just like, okay, Louis, you can have it. So Delphine and Louis moved into the small, stripped down, modest, empty house. Because see, when Laurent was declared dead, all the family members went and got everything they wanted out of this house. So there was basically nothing in the house. Now, do you think Delphine was happy about that?
No.
She used to modest, she's not used to modest, furnishing. She's used to lavish and extravagant. And in a short amount of time, Delphine, instead of being grateful that she had escaped an angry mob and had a house to live in, she becomes annoyed with her living conditions. She's annoyed.
Oh, she's so put upon.
She is, poor baby. I mean, she is just annoyed and begins to write letters.
Poor sack of shit.
And her daughter and son-in-law comes out to see her because they have to see, their mother's living conditions. And her son-in-law writes a letter to his father while he's the son-in-law is in France visiting, the LaLauries. And he says, I'm going to quote this because it's just ridiculous. My poor mother-in-law is disgusted with France, owing to the falsehoods and slander that followed them. The poor thing was confined to Laurent's unfurnished house by that riffraff LaLaurie family, and without a bed to lie on. She tells me of her sorrows and can't stop herself from breaking down into tears.
I do declare.
Bitch, please.
Yeah.
Oh, you poor sack of shit.
Yeah, you.
Yeah. So she is
Call
just,
me a fucking river.
She is just, tearful and mistreated and misunderstood. And, we can't have a nice house because, all these slanderous rumors follow us. So, yeah, I mean, she's convinced her son-in-law.
Slanderous rumors.
That's what she calls them, is slanderous rumors. The slanderous rumors that follow her.
City caught your ass.
Yeah, no shit. No shit.
You weren't there, she says. There's slanderous rumors. How do you in France know what happened in New Orleans?
4,000 people came by and saw y'all enslaved individuals after they took them out of the attic.
So Delphine and Louis left Villeneuve in October of 1835 and moved to Paris. And this is documented in a letter written by Madame LaLaurie to her granddaughter, basically telling the granddaughter that, I'm sorry I haven't written you. I've been so put upon and so tired. But again, you haven't written me either. Okay, so she's basically guilting the granddaughter. In 1836, 2 of Delphine's daughters moved to Paris because they miss their mother and they want to live with her. In July of 1836, daughter Janine visits her mother in Paris. And this is documented by Janine's letter to her father-in-law. And, basically saying they're having a great time here. She's missed her mom so much, this kind of stuff. And in 1838, her son, Paulin, this is Mr. Blanc's kid, He drops out of Yale and moves to Paris. He's very lazy. He writes to friends that sometimes he sleeps until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's still in his night clothes in the afternoon, and he sits around and smokes cigarettes and chats with Mama.
Lord.
Yeah, and it doesn't ever occur to him to get a job or anything like that. He was just tired of Yale. He was living his little trust fund baby life with the money that Mr. Blanc had set up for him prior to his passing, that was not able to be touched in settling his debts and his assets and that kind of thing. But now he's bored of Yale.
This life is too hard. I'm going to Paris to live with Mama.
I'm going to live with my mother. I'm going to live with my mother. My mummy understands me.
Crepes and cigarettes for days.
Why are they British all of a sudden? I don't understand.
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
You know.
It's just, we're just emphasizing the ridiculousness of it all.
I know. Oh,
okay.
God.
Well, I'm going to France to live with
Oui, let's go to France. Yes.
Wait. They're not French. These people were born in America, were they not?
French. They're French.
French and Irish descent.
I know.
And I don't know how to do an Irish accent unless you can say, I don't know. So I'm going to tell you that around this time,
So
I'm going to tell you, Louis LaLaurie, he's finally had enough. After a couple of years, he is over Delphine's complaining and playing the victim routine, and he just up and leaves her.
Oh,
leaves
damn!
her.
I thought you were gonna say he poisoned her ass. Shit.
No.
Damn.
He up and he leaves her. He leaves her. He leaves his son that they have together, Jean-Louis. Louis Pierre. Excuse me. Damn me.
All the Louis.
One of the Louis. Yeah.
And he decides he's going to move to Cuba. Now, Cuba seems to be a hot spot because that's where her first husband, that's where she had to go and get her daughter baptized at her first husband. Yeah. I don't know what the hell is with Cuba, but apparently Cuba's the place to go.
It's like, murderous wife, tropical drinks on a beach.
Yeah. And it's documented in a letter he wrote to his son-in-law requesting personal items from New Orleans. He wanted some of his personal things from New Orleans sent to Cuba, saying that he and Delphine had separated. So this is actually documented that he does move to Cuba. And Louis LaLaurie died in 1873 and is buried in the Espada Cemetery in Havana. So 1873, that's it for him. He's out. So Delphine is once again in financial trouble in 1840. Okay. And her son-in-law, Augustine, has apparently been embezzling her money.
Man, this is just a wonderful family.
And her brother Louis's money, because her brother Louis is the one who had recommended that Delphine give power of attorney to Augustine and the other brother-in-law.
Freaking Brady Bunch over here.
They realized this whenever suddenly Marie don't get her check. And she excuse me, she's writing letters. Excuse me, we haven't got our money. Excuse me, we haven't got our money. Well, he pretty much ignores them. And she's like, where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money? And Delphine could not rein in her spending. So she began to borrow from banks, borrow heavily. And until they caught on and realized she didn't have no job. Well, how the hell is she going to pay us back? So they stopped lending her money. And all of her grown children relied on her for money. And her son and daughter both wrote Augustus or Augustine, it's both ways, so it's documented both ways, beseeching him to send money. And all the letters sent during this time concern sending money. In 1841, Delphine's brother Louis arrives in Paris and most likely assists Delphine with some finances. So he kind of helps her out of the woods there for a moment. And in 1846, another morbid turn of luck. Delphine's brother dies at the age of 62 and leaves Delphine 75% of his estate and 25% of his estate to his little daughter, Louisa. And he wrote that he hoped that Delphine would respect his wishes and free his slaves.
There's a lot of convenient deaths around her whenever she's hard up for cash.
A lot.
So her brother's little daughter, Edwin, was left a very small percentage, only 25% of his estate. And the estate was basically worth around $7 million. But Delphine was so greedy that she couldn't be happy with the $5 million that she was going to get. She contested the will and tried to say that because her brother wasn't married to this woman and this kid, this kid shouldn't be included in the inheritance, that she shouldn't get anything. Well, she lost that court battle. The courts were like, no, get out of here. Get out of here. But that immediately in 1847 had put them right back into prominence. And they were prominent in Paris. And they had money and wealth and a beautiful home. And Delphine LaLaurie was right back on top. So what happened to her? What became of her? Different stories. Some people say it was a wild boar hunting accident. And I mean, in the Great Pyrenees Mountains. Now, would not that have been like an appropriate?
That would have been perfect. That would have been
eaten by boars.
Perfect.
Eaten by wild boars.
Perfect.
How horrible. Because, a wild boar, he ain't going to kill you. He's just going to gnaw on you and keep tearing you up with those tusks. That would have been a fitting and wonderful death. But, just an appropriate death for her. But actually, it was a far less exciting death.
No.
She died at her home in Paris in 1849 at the age of 62 from a lingering illness. And that is her death photo. No cause of death is listed in the French records. She was 62. That would have been considered, very old. And she was rumored to have a lingering illness. And so we're assuming that she died of natural causes. And on December 9th of 1849, she was given a third-class burial in the tomb of the Nota and Noel families at the Montmartre Cemetery in Paris.
Yeah.
And that cemetery is one of the few that's still in existence today from the 19th century. Strangely enough, it is overrun with cats.
Okay.
I don't know why that was appropriate to mention, but every story I found said that this is a cemetery that is overrun with felines.
Sounds like my kind of place. I want to go.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I just caught my foot on something up, wiggling around. Now, January 7th, 1850, it's rumored that her body was exhumed and brought back to New Orleans. Many think that she's buried in the San Luis Cemetery No. 1. But burial books from the cemetery end in 1841 and don't resume until 1857. So there is no record of this burial in 1850. Now, her son, Paulin Blanc, owns a family tomb there, and it is a large 6-shelf tomb. But the first recorded burial in that tomb was not Paulin. It was Delphine's great-granddaughter, who was buried there in 1884. Suspicious? You build this tomb, you pay for the cemetery plot, but yet the first person's in it is Delphine's great-granddaughter. The truth is that nobody actually knows where Madame LaLaurie is, because it was alleged that her death plate, that a marker was found in the Louisiana Cemetery, Cemetery No. 1. However, it's written in French, and more than likely that is the identical plaque that was probably on her cemetery in France. So where Madame LaLaurie is buried is a mystery. We don't know exactly. We know where she is recorded to be buried. But
it's probably a good thing. I'm just going to be honest that nobody knows where she's buried, because if she was, let's say, buried in New Orleans somewhere, can you imagine the amount of desecration that would not that I'm saying that would be against that in her situation, but the amount of desecration that would have to take place.
You don't want her to be held up as someone to aspire to be either, because they're weird people, that'll be like, oh, she was a hero, and then there's some like, oh, she was a monster. There's always that one little weird faction, that think these awful people are someone to be admired.
Yeah, so maybe it's a good thing that nobody knows.
I mean, if anybody knew where it was, she would have been a trailblazer. It would have been the first gender neutral bathroom in New Orleans. So.
Very true.
So which brings us to the mansion. Now, we know that it was destroyed by angry townspeople. But what happened to it after that? So apparently, since the location was basically destroyed, it was sold off, basically to, just get some money. And in March 24th of 1837, it was sold to Pierre Edward Trestor for $14,000, who didn't keep it long. He sold it 3 months later for the exact same amount, $14,000, to Charlie Caffin. Now, Caffin is the person who renovated it and made it basically into what you see today. He did the structure. He repaired things. He tried to restore it to the beauty that it once had. And that's when the stories of the house being haunted started to be heard. People walking by on the street would report hearing tortured screams coming from the building. And it did seem that anybody that owned it or tried to live there or tried to run a business from there suffered really bad luck. So after Caffin fixed it up, he rented out to turn it into a boys' school. And that shut down after a couple of years. Then it sat empty until Caffin finally sold it to a music teacher. And in 5 years, she was trying to get rid of it. She sold it to a tobacco merchant who rented it out to another school. The tobacco merchant used the house. Okay, so the tobacco merchant, even though he rented it out for a school, he used it as collateral for large loans 3 separate times. And then he failed to repay the loans, so the house was seized. So one of the people that the tobacco merchant owed money to decided that they were going to snap up the house and got it at auction for a mere $6,000.
Holy shit, what a deal.
Damn.
And it became a school again in 1878. And then it closed again, and it was empty once more. Now, one of the stories about the school was that at one point it was a girls' school, and that the girls would report being pushed and pinched and pulled and tormented by things that they could not see. So again, it's empty. And then next to come in was the New Orleans Conservatory of Music. And it failed due to a scandalous rumor being launched about the director. Could never find what that scandalous rumor was. But once again, the mansion was empty. The New Orleans Times ran a story on the house and said that the house had become inhabited, and this is their quote. The New Orleans Times ran a story on the house, and it said that the house had become inhabited with spooks and was a white elephant for its owner. That is the quote in the New Orleans Times. So the owner wasn't making any money, and he just started renting out space to whoever would pay. And in 1893, he sold it to an Italian immigrant named Fortunato Greco. And Fortunato Greco capitalized on the fact that people were fascinated with the house. He posted a sign on the outside saying, "There are no ghosts in this house." And then he charged people to come in and see for themselves.
It's like when you see the real estate signs, it's like, definitely not haunted. Like,
So this gimmick, as you can imagine, drew large crowds of people. And it made Greco a lot of money.
I bet it did.
So between 1895 and 1905, Greco opened up a bar in the bottom floor of the mansion, and he called it the Haunted Exchange. And then the building,
he's awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fortunato Greco. I like him too. Then the building turned into a multi-unit apartment building. And it was during this time when it was a apartment building that the house was kind of beginning to be destroyed again. The mahogany walls that Caffin had put in had been painted over with people doing their apartment their way. Chandeliers were broken, and it began to fall into really bad disrepair again. And tenants were reporting to Greco that they were being tormented by spirits. Even the bartender at the Haunted Exchange bar on the ground floor reported that he had seen ghosts. And in 1916, Greco unloaded the house to a realty company, and the house passed again through several different owners. Nobody seemed to want to buy it and just live there. Nobody wanted to. In the 1920s, every inch of space was rented out by tenants, and people were piled on top of each other. And the bottom floor, which had been the Haunted Exchange bar, was being used as a stable for horses.
Damn.
Wow.
Can you imagine how bad this was? And the residents still reported seeing ghosts. So the mansion continues to change hands because no one seems to want to own it for long, and many of the owners cite an onset of bad luck once they purchased the house. And in 1969, the mansion was bought by radiologist Dr. Harry Albright for $232,000. Not quite the $6,000 deal that the other guy had gotten. And he renovated it. He fixed it up. He made it beautiful again. He refurbished it, and then he put it on the market for $1.9 million in 1988. And the New Orleans paper mocked him ferociously. They mocked him publicly in the paper for trying to sell a cursed and haunted house at such a crazy price. They ran a story about it. Now, what do you think that did for his ability to sell the son of a bitch?
Breaking publicity out the ass right there.
No, because they were saying it was crazy to try to sell a haunted house.
Well, it depends on your market, who you selling it to.
Yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. He put it on the house in the market in 1988. In 2000, he sold it for $1.7 million to a Colorado investor named James Monroe.
Damn. Took him 12 years.
Took him 12 years to sell it. And Monroe used it as a vacation home and a secondary residence. It was his sometimes house. Like, he'd show up sometimes, then he wouldn't be there sometimes. And it was his sometimes house.
I wish I had a sometimes house.
Yeah, me too.
Like the fucking LaLaurie mansion.
So, Dr. Albright, whenever he had owned it, he had always said, I didn't experience anything strange in the house. Of course, he was trying to sell the house. But Dr. Albright did meet with a little bit of bad luck. Well, actually, some really bad luck. In January of 2005, Dr. Albright found himself in a terrible situation. He was having dinner in the French Quarter, and the French Quarter was filled with tourists, and they were all there to either participate or attend or watch the Sugar Bowl, which is a bowl game for college football. And as Dr. Albright was leaving the restaurant, he tossed a mint. Now, where he got the mint, I don't know, but there was a mint, and he tossed it on the table. And the table was occupied. Well, the people that were sitting at the table took offense, like, dude, why are you throwing stuff at us? Da, 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 da. And one of the guys got up from the table and followed him outside and began to attack him. And Dr. Albright fell to the ground and hit his head.
Oh, no.
And he was in a coma for 3 weeks and suffered permanent brain damage.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
So while Dr. Albright didn't own the house at that time, the bad luck still caught him. So in 2006, James Monroe, he's the one who has the LaLaurie mansion as his sometimes house, sells the house to, you guessed it, actor Nicolas Cage.
Hey.
Now, Nicolas Cage was known for buying lots of properties.
Yeah.
But bad luck, he didn't always pay the taxes.
No, he did not.
And he lost a lot of those properties that he bought. And the LaLaurie mansion was one of the ones that he lost. Now, right now, the house is privately owned. I do not know the owners' names. You can see outside, but you can't go in it because it is a private residence.
Isn't it like a sweet little old lady and like her caretaker or whatever?
It's to the best of my knowledge, it's an older couple or an older.
Yeah.
I mean, two people that I don't know if they're together, if they're cohabitating, if they just fuck buddies. I don't know what they are. They're in New Orleans. They can be doing their own thing. Don't begrudge me, Mawsome. Dinner. I don't have a good ending for that phrase, so go ahead.
Say, because I thought it was. I don't know if it wasn't on Portals to Hell, but Jack Osborne, him and his dad had a show called Jack and Ozzy's World Tour, and I believe it was on there. And that's where, because when Jack was doing he had another. It wasn't Portals to Hell. It was another paranormal investigation show he had a while back.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that's where. Yeah, that's where he said he saw like he actually had a ghostly experience, and so he brought Ozzy in there to go sleep in there, and that's a pretty funny episode if you get a chance to watch it. But
Sharon, I think there's a ghost in me pajamas.
So gentlemen, that is the most in-depth story that I can possibly give you off of about 30 or 40 different articles, 12 or 14 different podcasts, several documentaries, and the Smithsonian Channel. That is the most in-depth story that I can give you about Madame Marie Delphine McCarty LeBlanc. McCarty de la Candelaria Blanc LaLaurie.
Delphine, banana nana fofine, fee fi mo mean.
LaLaurie.
So,
Jesus Christ, yes.
Now, something that I came across in some research, and I'm going to throw this up on the screen, and I know we don't usually throw up somebody else's evidence, but in this case, I'm going to.
Okay.
We are going to credit them. Again, before I even throw this on the screen, this is not our evidence. I'm going to make that very, very, very clear. I happened across
not our
this.
evidence, but you have something that you want to show us. I'm all
because I found this very, very interesting. Now, backstory before I throw this up. This was a lady who just happened to be visiting the French Quarter. She was standing around the LaLaurie mansion. She's probably doing one of those tours like, they offer down there, which some are fascinating, some you can skip. But anyways.
They are for entertainment mainly.
Yes, they are. And she was on TikTok. And it wasn't until somebody like that she went to go review, or somebody had told her something, that she had actually caught something in her TikToks while on this tour. Now, I'm going to throw these up and we can debate. Now, again, before I throw them up, not our evidence. This is, if you want to follow her and go see it, it's at Sarah J. Pierce. That's Sarah with an H, J-J-A-Y, Pierce. And she is on TikTok. And this is what she captured. I'm going to let this sit for just a second.
What the fuck?
And I find it very interesting. The figure on the left, I feel like I can explain a little bit, depending on what she was. Let me take the banner down.
To me, that looks like there is on the left hand side of my screen, that almost looks like a child-sized figure going through a door.
Well, and it also feels like it could have been captured in motion of a person actually moving, depending if she happened to be taking a picture at the time, or
not solid
or something
enough though, and you can see through once it crosses the line of the wall.
Here's my
I can
reason
see
being,
completely through that.
But here's my reason being is because the shoe in it is very prevalent in the photo, and it casts a shadow. Now, if you look at the one on the right is a lot more interesting, because I don't see a shadow. I see something on the ground that is dark, but I don't see a shadow that I would feel would be a shadow of a woman in Victorian clothing, because you can tell that this is obviously a woman in period
on the
garb.
right hand side.
Yeah, on the right hand side.
Could that be?
That's a full body apparition. I mean, it looks like in 1780s garb, or you know.
I'm saying, could the black thing on the bottom be like the train from her dress?
Could be.
I don't know.
Could be. I found the one on the right a lot more compelling than the one on the left, in my opinion. Yeah. Because on the one on the left, I could see it could be like in motion picture capturing.
Now here's where my question comes in. On the right hand side, I'm fascinated with both of them, but the fact that it looks like there is a woman standing on the right hand side in that picture, my first question becomes: do they have mannequins that stand in there at the time she went? When did she go? Was this one time whenever you could? Look in the windows and they had things down on the ground floor where, they just kind of had for exhibition. Could that be a mannequin there that is in the window?
No, that's in motion. Yes.
No, on the right.
Yeah. On the right. See through. Look at the bottom of the dress. You can see the step that's right there.
And it's outside, like it's outside of the building. It's in front of the building.
Yeah.
Wait, are you okay? I guess I don't know what you guys are looking at, because I'm looking at what looks to be a full-bodied apparition woman on the right-hand side.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
And I'm not seeing any kind of train of a dress or anything. I'm seeing what looks like a full dress and a shoulder pad and what maybe hair or a hat that's bouffanted out. I'm not seeing
like it's almost like the dress comes up to the upper part of her back. You can see her shoulders, her neck, and the back of her hair.
Yes.
And and what I'm looking at, it's in front of the building, like it's outside of the building. So I mean, it's.
Yeah, and if you look towards the sidewalk portion that this figure is walking on, you can tell that there's a differentiation between what it's walking on and whatever concrete is in between the building that it is in front of. And you can see that line straight through her dress from right where that thicker lamppost is, where it starts all the way to the edge of the photo. You can see that go straight through her dress. So to me, it's transparent figure.
Yeah.
See, and she's not transparent because I can see her. The one on the left is transparent. But she's fully formed. She is a fully formed figure. That is a full body apparition, if that is truly an apparition. And that is a hell of a capture.
Yeah,
if that's truly what it is. That's a hell of a capture.
All right, let's discuss this psychotic bitch.
Okay. Y'all start.
Let's get into this real quick. I go back to an argument of, well, hell, I think she even defied it. The argument of nature versus nurture. What the hell? Like, what the hell happened? Because
that's what I was going to bring up too. Yeah, exactly.
She's got other siblings. She's got kids. She's got parents. I mean, and she's the only one out of this family. So, I mean, was she just a freaking bad seed? You know? Was there something that inside her just snapped? Did it happen to be when her father divided the estate? I don't know. What are you tell me your thoughts?
I think that, because I was going to bring that up too, because like, I mean, we don't know if there's any like abuse in her past that we know of. There's no
from
history
everything
of
I've read, she was extremely petted and spoiled because she was the baby.
And
she was the baby and mama's last child.
And if I were to guess, I would say that she got away with so much when she was growing up and never faced any sort of consequences. So when she got older and she had money, she knew, and she had connections, she knew she would face no consequences. Therefore, she did what she did because she could. And she knew there was nothing. So I can do this. Look at me. I'm rich. I am white. I am, a woman of prominence. I have a husband who is a person of prominence. I have all these connections. I can do what I want and no one's going to stop me. And even what she was able to do to the people that lived in her house,
just extremely privileged and never had to face any consequences for it.
No, I think it's like a Patrick Bateman sort of thing. I mean,
she was a petted and spoiled child who was probably never told no. And again, I think that some of the, because before she was married to Louis LaLaurie, there really hadn't been much speculation about her being bad to her slaves. Of course, everybody would whisper that, her slaves look tired, her slaves look hungry, but there was never really any reported incidents of her being any more or less cruel than anyone else was at the time. Now, it is alleged that Dr. LaLaurie, and again, the allegation comes from Delphine herself, that he would beat her, and that's why they had to separate. Now, if you think about it, you're getting your ass kicked by, someone who is 15 years your junior, your husband. What the hell are you going to do about it? Police are going to come around and be like, that's your husband. So who do you turn take it out on? Well, you're not going to take it out on your wonderful children because, they're perfect.
I also think, because some of the research I found said that she was also accused of possibly sexually torturing her slaves as well. So I think maybe she was getting her jollies out of it too. So that I found nothing about sexual torture.
Here's my thing. Here's my thing on the entire thing, all encompassing. Looking at her life, looking at everything that she went through, I think that it was. I mean, it almost has to be more than just this one period in her life. We look at the deaths that happen around her. Mysteriously deaths, just very opportunistic deaths. If you think about it,
now really, the deaths really weren't mysterious. Her mother died of natural causes. She wasn't anywhere near her father whenever he died. Her brother had already gone back to the United States at the time that he died.
She also had how many enslaved people that passed prior to all of this of mysterious.
And the fact that whenever she needs money, and she's hard up for
Somebody happens
cash,
to
someone
die.
of
That is-
Somebody
prominence in
dies.
her life happens to die. That's very
Yeah, so here's what we do know, that Delphine was never formally accused of mistreating her slaves until she married Dr. LaLaurie. Now, also we do know that 20 slaves did die in her care. Mostly were women and children, and these were reported deaths, which, don't get me wrong, that was considered an extremely high number. You know, because again, that is at that point.
Women
Sorry,
and
my
children.
apologies. That was considered. They were considered property. You know,
Yeah,
and,
but
and
women and children only.
they were mostly. It says mostly women and children.
Okay. Okay.
But still, 20 slaves dying was a huge number. We do know that she never, ever, ever took any accountability or publicly expressed any remorse for her actions or her alleged actions. And at the time of the fire, there were 20 slaves that were in residence. Now, it was technically 27, 28. Yeah, 28 in total, because you had the cook and then you had the 7 that were locked into the room. And then there were 20 slaves that during the fire, 11 of them we know were sold. And there were 19 that to this day have never been accounted for. Hopefully they ran away and they got free and they never had to deal with anybody the likes of her again.
Did you happen to come across, because I thought I had found something in a little bit of research that I did about excavation, excavation, let's put it that way.
Of her backyard?
On her property with possibly some remains that were exhumed in the process of that.
So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I did not include that because I was afraid I was going to run too long. So what it is there were 2 papers in the town, the New Orleans Bee, which was considered the more legitimate, and then the New Orleans Advertiser, which was considered more like a tabloid. Now, the New Orleans Advertiser reported that after the fire, 2 of her slaves had died. And they also reported that that her backyard was dug up and that they found multiple bodies on the property of the house. Now, the editor of the Bee came back and said, no, the slaves didn't die. They ended up being fine, and that there were never any remains found on her property. Now, these 2 guys were known to hate each other. And if one of them said something, the other would pop in and contradict him in the next week's paper.
Gotcha.
So it became one of those things of, are we going to sell stories? You know, kind of like with the Bell Witch thing. You have to go with what might or may or may not have sold the story. And these stories were sensational. This was a sensational story. This was a paper selling story. But these 2 guys hated each other so much that sometimes they would intentionally contradict each other just to be more credible. So you really can't trust a lot of what's said about them during this time.
Well, and like you said earlier, never to ever defend Madame LaLaurie,
Never.
because I think she is
She's
one of
horrible.
the sickest, most evil, sadistic bitches I think I've ever come across.
Same.
But anyways, you know, I mean, we do have to think of the history of where we're at or the time period in history where we're at. When an enslaved person dies, a lot of the time, you know, they're buried however their owners chose or see fit, you know. And if that happens to be on the land in an unmarked grave, then that's on the land in the unmarked grave, unfortunately. So if that is the case with supposed bodies being found on her land, I mean, that's an explanation right there for it, because we are.
You gotta remember,
in
this
that
was in
time
this was in the French Quarter in downtown New Orleans. It's highly unlikely that if you were going to bury somebody, you're going to do it there. Why wouldn't you do it on this,
True.
you know,
True.
1,344 acre
Yeah.
plantation? See, now to me, that makes more sense, because it would be much harder to find someone out there, and there probably would have already on Mr. McCarty's land have been some kind of graveyard. More than likely. So to bury it in New Orleans, and trust me, with all the renovations, don't you think they've done it at some point?
More than likely, yeah. Well, I mean, without a doubt,
Probably,
you would think that they would have to.
So I would be inclined to agree with the editor of the New Orleans Bee that there were no bodies actually found on the premises, because that is proof. And she was a smart enough lady to do her best not to leave proof. She was shrewd, she was cunning, and she played the part of the chameleon.
I did not show the picture of the torture chamber earlier. I apologize for that, so I will throw it up right now.
That's okay. That was the torture chamber.
Now, this is obviously a recreation, isn't that correct? But
Yes.
this is an
Yes,
exact, pretty much
is
exact
yes.
replica.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I read that there was actually a collar that she had where
That
the
was
spikes.
spiked.
Yes, and if you wore it long enough, you would eventually kill yourself by breathing because it would shred your throat.
Yeah,
and
the
would,
spikes were on the inside of the collar. And you had to hold
Mhm.
your head or your neck at a certain angle, because if you moved slightly forward or slightly back, those tiny razor sharp teeth would dig into your neck and eventually it would cut your jugular. So if you did not stand completely still with your head in one position, every time you moved to breathe, you were getting tiny cuts, and goodness forbid you fell asleep. Guess what? Your throat was cut.
Mhm.
And that is a documented piece of evidence. And just,
Mm.
I mean, I didn't even put in everything that was said to be there. Now, let me tell you that because this is such a sensational story, because the acts of torture were so awful and so cruel, you have to remember it becomes like a big game of telephone.
Right.
Every time the story is told, someone adds to it, says, oh, well, you know what I saw? I saw Madame LaLaurie. And, they drug those people out, but I'll tell you what you didn't see. Suddenly it gets added onto. And a story that does not need any embellishment has indeed become a bit embellished, which is why I tried to find things that could be documented and could be told to you, that I at least had a letter, a court document or something that I knew were positively factual based on things that you can point to and go, here it is. Some of the stories of the slaves that I told you, some of them can't be documented, but I told you the ones that couldn't be documented. I told you the ones that were. So this is an absolutely horrible story that people delight in the macabre. I'm so glad that this is not a today story. I'm so glad this is way back when we can imagine ourselves farther removed and more enlightened than that, whether you be or you not be farther removed or enlightened. It's a terrible story. It's an awful, awful, awful story of an awful, awful, awful human being. And we don't sanitize history. We want you to remember it, to look at it. And my God, do not ever repeat it. Don't ever forget it. You should be ashamed. You should be ashamed of this history. And you should remember that that is not right. And that, God, please don't ever let us get back to a place like that. That is awful.
May she burn in the ninth circle of hell.
No shit.
Yeah.
Right there next to Satan himself. And I pray that those flames never burn out.
I hope they never go out either.
Ugh.
So, gentlemen, have we sufficiently covered Madame Marie,
I think so.
Delphine LaLaurie, and all of her many husbands in the LaLaurie mansion?
It's one of those topics that, I mean, unfortunately, there's not much to debate. She was a sadistic, evil
awful.
woman.
Yes.
If you don't agree to that, then in my opinion, there's something wrong with you as well.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
and it seems like the only husband that she was married to that was halfway of a decent person was her first husband, Ramon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe we only know that he was, but he wasn't really even that decent because he was a slave importer.
And I'm gonna flat out say what I was to add on to earlier, what I was saying, that you don't think the man of a marriage knows what's happening inside his property during that particular time period. Yeah. Okay. Not only did he probably not know, he probably actively participated.
Yeah.
That's just an assumption, because
even though it's said by everybody that he let her do her thing.
I'm like,
but
if the neighbors know, if the neighbors know, how's it gonna be?
There's nobody that thinks that Louis LaLaurie was innocent in any of this, but the brunt of the blame is put on Delphine.
Yep.
Maybe she's an easy scapegoat. Maybe this is something she and Louis like to do together. Maybe it's one of those things that they kind of.
A question I do have, I just thought about. Do we know anything that happened to her little sister after that? The one from her father's next relationship after her mother died.
Delphine Amici? Yes. I do not. The last we know is the last that I found. Of course, I didn't deep dive into Delphine Amici, McCarty. That is her name. Sophie Moussant was her mother, and Louis Bartholomew McCarty was her dad. Well, Louis or Jean, I can't remember.
Bartholomew's the right.
Bartholomew is the right middle name. Hang on, I can tell you. I
wonder what her children thought, and if her children were made to participate.
There is a
That's a
story,
really good
a
question.
rumored story, that there's a story of her daughters trying to feed the slaves, that she would beat her daughters for trying to give them food. Could not find anything that was substantiated by that, and I figured the story was terrible enough.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to
Even
have this
with that,
fixation on women and young girls
yeah,
with the tortures and the beatings and stuff. It's just
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So
yeah. Her father was Louis Bartholomew.
yeah.
De McCarty.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I had it right. But they're all named either Louis or Jean, and all the
I know.
Romans are Marie, and so it's like, if
See,
you
it's
say
like
Marie, you're gonna have it all.
nothing else happened to her. Her sisters weren't sadistic like her. I mean, it's like
No.
you
I
have
bet they were horrified.
They're like, "Hi, I'm Marie. Hi, I'm Marie," and she's like, "Hi, I'm Marie."
But little
I mean,
Delphine,
like,
little Delphine Missy McCarty, I do not know what happened to her. She walked away with basically her value of $2 million and 2 slaves from her father's estate, and I do not know what happened to her after that.
that might have to be a follow-up Patreon exclusive video that you'll have to
may
jump
have
over
to
Patreon.
be.
Speaking of which,
I'm over that for a while. Go ahead.
Speaking of which, well, we want to thank y'all for joining us for this episode, Madame LaLaurie, the murderess and mistress of New Orleans. Whatever channel you're watching us from on social media, please remember we're across all channels on social media, not just the one you're currently watching us on. And we don't utilize all channels for the same reason, so you might miss out on something. So just go follow us across the board. It makes it that much easier. And also, we've got 2 investigations that are on sale at the moment: the Gregg County Historical Museum, which is going to take place on June the 11th, and the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas, which is going to take place on October 7th and 8th. It is, to my knowledge, one and only 2-night investigation that you can buy a ticket to and come be a part of. So if you've missed out prior to or want to join us on your very first one, please feel free to run over there to our Facebook page. Click on the Eventbrite links. We'll post those up again tomorrow and purchase our one of your tickets for them. And Shelly, take it away.
And if you want to know what we really talk about, you can become a Patreon member. It's $5 a month, and you get everything. We don't make you do the tiers and all that kind of mess. For $5, you get everything. You get Spirits with Shelly, Bedtime with Blake, Ryan's Reviews, and you get all pre-broadcast exclusive material. We have a little conversation before we go on every night, and child, sometimes they are wild. So I encourage you to go and become a Patreon member. So Ryan, tell them what else they need to do. We're just giving you all kinds of homework.
Go rate and review us on Apple Music. The more you do that, the more it boosts our signal, the more people can see us. If you have any questions about anything, if you ever watch a podcast and you're listening or you're whatever, send us, do we have an official email they can send anything to, Blake,
Yes,
if they want to ask us a question?
It is the THE, V as in Victor, P as in Paul, pod. So that's the EVP pod at gmail.com.
Yeah. So if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to ask. I'm going to do our best to answer anything that you have to ask us.
And
also,
we do read and answer comments.
We do.
Yes, we do.
There's a comment. Now, I do go and I look and I see if we have any comments on Apple Music. I haven't seen any new ones in a while. So if you could, please go rate, review, and comment on our Apple Music page. Absolutely. Also on Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I'm Shelly Pruitt, and of course my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Thank you so much for watching Everything Vaguely Paranormal, and we will see you next Tuesday.